Beware Maria. Maria talks about music, about education, about psychology and art, about sex and gender roles, about meaning and purpose, about things that are fun or interesting and can relate to each other. Maria has conversations with herself and with others, and she finds it a bit odd to talk about herself in the third person. Just beware and think about it. Do you know what exactly is a punk? I must confess I was not totally clear about it. I had images, I had listened to some groups. After doing a bit of research, I can say punk is a very controversial style. Born in the middle of the 70s in the UK and in the States, in a time of economic recession, where unemployment was really high and there was a lot of people leaving school without finishing. A whole generation felt deceived, marginalized, and they started to express their disappointment and feeling deceived with influence of various cultural movements associated in its origin to rock. Before them, there was a time in the 60s of peace and love, the hippie time, who also did protest against what the governments were doing, like the Vietnam War and the economic crisis. But they had a lot more optimism and they were more calm when protesting. Now, these were more against the establishment, openly and frontally defiant to society. The clothing, the makeup, the music, that were very, very different, is all a way to protest. The way to communicate of punk was to communicate directly and frontally. You may have heard of groups like the Ramones, the Clash, the Sex Pistols, the Dead Kennedys as a mainstreams, and also Crash. Punk was not a name they originally chose. It is the press that gave that name, meaning in poor condition or worthless, but they took it, embraced it, and some of them say that punk is not a fashion, but it's a way of fighting against the establishment. Different from rock groups that were at the time making the fame and fortune, and they had taken rock to the most expressionist way, not forgetting the political situation. Some of them had a very wild kind of life, but this is not all there was, because punk groups expanded in different parts of the world. And there is also a stream that went against the archetype of the wild punk who is taking drugs and getting drunk. But they were in a different kind of lifestyle. Some of them were ecological collectives, vegetarian, and even vegan. Today, we've got Mike Dines, a musician, a writer, a scholar, a publisher who has numerous publications in different kinds of press and novels, music, and he is something remarkable, which is a punk scholar. He is currently the co-pathway leader for popular music at Middlesex University, and he has written chapters in the Oxford Handbook of Punk Rock. Mike, I'm leaving out a lot of things. What would you like to add to it? What defines you in terms of punk scholar?
I suppose two really big aspects of my kind of scholarly activities is the fact that on the one hand, I suppose, because I've got a doctorate in punk. My doctorate was in the on Crass, which is a big, quite a well-known band from the anarcho-punk of the 1980s.
I do.
On the other hand, I'm also a kind of a DIY publisher, and I formed Itchy Monkey Press. And what I do is I publish on a very small level books that kind of show, that are really kind of tales from punks that were there and punks on the street. So one of the first books I published was a novel by a guy called Ted Curtis called Darkening Light. And then I published Tales on the Punk Side, which was a kind of a compendium of there were a few kind of academic type kind of chapters in there, but most of it was about punk stories, what it was like to be a punk back in the day. I've also published punk poetry, for instance. So those are kind of the two sides of my kind of scholarly activities.
Do you make any music at the moment? You play in a punk?
No, it's funny, because I was never in a punk band. The nearest thing to it, I suppose, was when I was doing my degree in the early 1990s, which was a classical music degree. I was in a folk band, kind of trying to emulate like the Pogues or kind of the Levelers or a band called Tofu Love Frogs, which I really liked. But my degree was in classical music, and my master's was in classical. So I was playing Bach and Beethoven and Schubert Lieder while listening to this kind of stuff. So no, I've never had that kind of punk guitarist kind of background.
I see. So how did you choose later on, after doing that you were going to do the doctorate in punk?
Well, I did my degree, and then ended up at Sussex University studying on a master's on what was called aesthetics and ideology and musical analysis. So it was looking at kind of the background of Western aesthetics and philosophy. Started to read a lot about this thing called the Kantian Sublime, and then thought, right, okay, I'm going to write a master's thesis on Crass and the Kantian Sublime. So I did that. Looking back, it wasn't particularly great. And then finished my master's, started to teach music A level, again, going back to that kind of classical kind of, repertoire, even though I'm listening to punk all the way through this. And then applied to do a PhD at Salford University on Crass and the Kantian Sublime. And it went from there. And of course, in the end, the Kantian Sublime thing got shoved out, and I kind of did this thesis on an overview of the anarcho-punk scene of the 1980s. And it's kind of just gone from there, really.
Okay, that's interesting. So, of course, I mean, a punk scholar is just a scholar who studies punk, doesn't need to be a punk themselves, but can you be a punk and not make music? If punk is music, you see what I mean?
This is the $6 million question.
Oh, and I made it.
Yeah. Oh, what is punk? What isn't punk? Who can be punk? We could be here all day and still not get an answer to this, because there are numerous definitions of what punk is. Some people believe that punk finished in kind of 1978, it was from 76 to 78 or 79 thereabouts, and then it kind of died. And then there were others who think that punk was more prevalent in the 1980s with kind of the anarcho-punk scene, or a thing called UK 82. And the UK 82 scene was that kind of typical Mohican kind of punk that you see in Camden and on postcards. That was the kind of birth of that kind of punk. And there are kind of still punks going today. There are punk scenes all over the world. And I kind of lead on this book series with a good colleague of mine, two good colleagues, one Russ Besley and Paolo Guerra. And what we do is we look at punk scenes all over the world, and I write about punk scenes, in the Philippines, for instance, and so and Argentina. So I've been writing about Krishna core in Argentina, for instance. So it's still going. But what is punk and who is punk? That is a rabbit hole that would take on any kind of conspiracy theorist.
So what kind of punk scene in a different country has called your attention?
Now, my research at the moment, which I've been researching for the last kind of 10 years, is it's a genre called Krishna core. And now we know about the Krishna, we know about the Hindu god Krishna. And we know about the Hare Krishna movement that came over here, or came over to America, in the mid-1960s, and was brought over by a guy called Prabhupada. So that's the Hare Krishna movement. And you can see them kind of down Oxford Street singing the Harinam and the Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. But in the 1990s in America and New York, these kind of hardcore punks, i.e. Krishna core, started to get into the Hare Krishna movement for various reasons. And so this genre was kind of formed called Krishna core. And these were kind of like, American punks singing about Krishna, but in a punk idiom.
But that is fascinating. But why would they decide to join?
Because there was a thing before Krishna core, in a way, there was this thing called straight edge punk. And straight edge punk was the kind of pushing back against this kind of stereotype of punks being drunk, high on drugs, destroying, this kind of, self-destructive kind of punk that never washed, that was dirty, that was spitting, that was swearing all the time. And straight edge said, hang on, we're going to be, and this goes to the kind of definition of punk, we're going to be really punk. We're not going to do all of that. And so straight edge punk became something where if you were straight edge, you don't drink, you don't take drugs, no promiscuous sex, for instance. And it was about being clean living. You went vegetarian, for instance. And now these days it's more about plant-based diets, but back in the 1990s, it was, about being vegetarian. And what happened in New York at the time was that you found that those things about promiscuity, no drink, no drugs, etc., kind of married up to the kind of the four principles of the Hare Krishna movement, which was very much the same. And it was about this kind of, Hare Krishna movement, there is no sex, no promiscuity, or there is no sex outside of marriage. There is no eating meat, no drink or drugs, there's no tobacco, no caffeine. And it was a kind of the marriage between the two. And then there was something else thrown in, which was a really influential kind of Rastafarian punk band called the Bad Brains. And Bad Brains was that kind of spiritual kind of root there for punk that happened before Krishna core. So you've got the kind of a mishmash of different things that's going on. And Krishna core was formed.
Shall we listen to a bit of it then?
Yes.
So what would you like that we play first?
Now, I suppose a good start, I suppose, would be a punk band called 108. There were two kind of key two key bands. There was a band called Shelter who kind of started this stuff with Ray Capo, who's a very, very influential figure. A good track that would for us to listen to would be 108, and there were two specific bands. There was Shelter and 108. And 108 was kind of formed by a guy called Raj Kishore. And an example that we're kind of here is their track Gopinath. Now, what might be quite interesting is for you to play first the traditional Indian bhajan, kind of a traditional arrangement.
And Mike, what is a bhajan?
A bhajan is a traditional form of spiritual kind of Indian hymn, so to speak. It's a traditional Indian song that was sung about kind of spiritual matters like Krishna, etc.
Okay, let's go for it.
Gopinath, 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 Gopinath.
it's really interesting because what 108 do is they actually take various verses from the traditional bhajan, which was written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Apologies for those Indian listeners out there. And they take one verse from the first part of the song, another verse from the second part of the traditional song, but then they have a mishmash of different verses throughout the song. So they actually all draw it together, but in a kind of a punk idiom. And then after that, what they do, they run straight into a traditional bhajan that they've written called 10.8. Now, 108 is a very auspicious number in Indian theology. And so they draw their lyrics then for 10.8 from chapter 10, verse 8 from the Bhagavad Gita. And so the lyrics for that is, I am the source of both mundane and spiritual worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who know this well engage in my bhajan with great joy in their hearts. And so this is a kind of, these were a punk band, 20-year-old kids in America that was doing this stuff. And it's really interesting.
Mm. Okay, so let's go for it.
Please hear my request. I am what you need. Voice addicted to world desire. No the cloud is like that. Oh, Gopinath, indeed, I am a servant of love. Worldly desires awaken my heart. Noose, fruit of work, tidings.
अहं सर्वस्य प्रभावो मत्तत् सर्वं प्रवर्तते इति मत्वा भजन्ते मां बुधा भावसमन्विताः मच्चित्ता मद्गता प्राणा बोधयन्तः परस्परं कथयन्तश्च मां नित्यं तुष्यन्ति च रमन्ति च तेषां सततयुक्तानं भजतां प्रीतिपूर्वकं ददामि बुद्धियोगं तं येन मामुपजन्ति ते तेषामेवानुकम्पार्थम् अहम् अज्ञानजं तमः नशायां यत्नभावस्तो ज्ञानदीपेन भास्वता
Did you have to travel for this kind of research, or it's not necessary nowadays?
No, it's not that necessary. I'd love to go to New York. One of the, I suppose, the two places I need to go are India and New York. But yeah, that's the plan. But in terms of a kind of, I know we're going to play another track. Is that I'm really good friends with and interviewed some guys from a band called Not For Sale, and they're a Filipino. They started out as a Filipino anarcho punk band, and soon became a Krishna core band under the kind of the leadership of Balarama Das. And I've been talking to Balarama Das and Manohara Das as well, who's also in the band, kind of interviewing them via different means. One of the best ways I've managed to do this is through the Krishna Call Chronicles, which is a series of interviews that my colleague and I, Madhu Bratadas, who's kind of a world authority on kind of Krishna Core, and we've been interviewing musicians and those that are part of the Krishna Core movement for my YouTube channel. And so we've been kind of engaging with people all over the world, and we've been interviewing kind of Italian Krishna Core, those that were in Krishna Core bands from Italy, kind of from America, from Slovenia, from the Philippines. And our aim is to get 108 interviews around this area. And N4S are a really interesting band because they started off, Balarama Das was actually a Catholic, and because of his kind of love of bands like Crass and Subhumans, which are UK anarcho-punk bands, which were very anti-religion, he became an atheist and so turned his back on religion, and then met up with some devotees in his country, and then went back to becoming a Hare Krishna devotee. And what's really interesting, we talk about traveling, we talk about kind of talking about punk bands all over the world, but what's really interesting here is that it's interesting for me is that Prabhupada brought this kind of the Hare Krishna movement and ISKCON over to America in the mid-1960s. In the 1990s, it was picked up by kind of Ray Cappo and Raj Kishore, and then it was kind of exported over a kind of, I know we're going to listen to a band called Bhakti from Argentina. The Krishna Call was then exported on a global scale to someone like Balarama Das in the Philippines, who now lives in an ashram in India. So Balarama Das has done that kind of cyclic kind of travel. So now Balarama is back in India, but it's a fantastic travel kind of and a hybrid kind of culture and music here.
Mike, I got another piece of music that I would like also to play that you gave me, and it's called Goloka. I can't pronounce this. Goloka Vrindavan.
Yeah, Goloka.
But not for sale. What could you tell us about that?
Well, it's again, you can hear it in the lyrics. So I picked this one because they're singing in English, and so the lyrics are quite clear. It's about staying high, and there's no come down. Again, it's that kind of straight edge kind of punk thing. No drugs. We don't need drugs. We've got Krishna. And Goloka Vrindavan, Krishna was born in Vrindavan, and that's where Balarama Das lives. And Krishna Goloka is where Krishna lives. And Children of the Dham, for instance, which the album's from, Dham means abode. It means somewhere where you live, and so it's the kind of the abode of Krishna. And so this is Goloka Vrindavan.
Okay, so I think we're going to leave for today, listen to today's piece. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mike. And we hope to have you back again one day. Okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Stay high forever! No more coming down! Stay high forever! No more coming down! Mahabuddha, Mahabuddha, Mahamohana, Mahabuddha, Mahamani, Satyam, Mahananda.
Mike has left, but we still have a little bit more time to play another piece. So I'm going to play the track 3 from the same disc for Not For Sale, Children of the Dumb, which is called Radhika Meditation. I've checked that Radhika is a type of mantra meditation.
Remember the burning car! Remember the burning car! Chakra below that, umbrella below that! Below that! Remember the camera up the night! Time for the middle of your soul! We're going to be a big time in that soul! Remember that, but I'm not a power, but I'm in the soul! Radha Krishna, Radha Jana Pradana! 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 Remember the blood below the knuckles! Remember the gold, the blood! The creeper below the flower! Remember the blood below the smoke dome! Remember the apple on the hill! Remember the beast on the right there! The mountain below the big old dome! Radha Krishna, Madam Buddha, Jana Pradana! Radha Krishna, Madam Buddha, Jana Pradana! Radha Krishna, Madam Buddha, Jana Pradana! Remember the giant under the mountain! Don't even know the lion! Remember the cloud on the other side! Remember the one on the big door! Remember the other below the mountain! Remember the ring below the altar! The cooling of the people to blazing fires! Of the material war! Radha Krishna, Madam Buddha, Jana Pradana! Radha Krishna, Madam Buddha, Jana Pradana! Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Is there any topic you would like me to talk about? If so, contact me at weweremaria@gmail.com and I'll see what I do. Have a good week and see you in the next episode. Bye.